Well, with Halloween well on its way here, I thought it would be appropriate to discuss uh, some of the controversial origins of this holiday. Now, any cursory um, surf over the internet or even in-depth research will reveal that hardly any one source agrees completely about anything beyond the basics. Even the origin of trick or treat and carved pumpkins is a source of fierce debate. I'm not going to pretend I know all the answers. I'm going to just go ahead and give you multiple answers for the various questions that you have, and that's the best I can do because the reality is that scholars and folklorists and everybody's an expert on Halloween. And so I'll just kind of deep, I'll dig deep into my ancient historical knowledge and I'll give you those perspectives. So let's simply begin where most began to talk with the ancient Celts, right? Halloween does has its origin in the ancient Gaelic festival known as Samhain or Samhain. The very first reference to Samhain happened to be on a Gaulish bronze tablet that's known as the Codenty calendar. And the word found here was inscribed as Sammonius. And this particular bronze tablet dates from the 2nd century CE. So we have our first official mention of Samhain in an inscription about 1,900 years ago. Obviously, it goes way back further, but it's still interesting in and of itself. If we look at this calendar, there's a youthful male bronze head that's nearby, and of course you're going to see other Old Irish words also inscribed on here. Now, basically, the Festival of Samhain commemorates the end of the lighter half of the year and the beginning of the, well, darker half of the year, and is sometimes viewed as the Celtic New Year. Now, the Celtic New Year is divided by four major celebrations. You have Imbolc, right? You have Beltane, right? You have Nasa, and you have Samhain, leaving 3 months in between each of these sacred days. Imbolc was the festival of motherhood and childbirth, right? Beltane was the fertility festival of purification by fire, and it is connected to the feast of the new king, the Holy King, right? When it comes to Lunasa, this was a commemoration of Luke, the oak god known as Bran, and the solemnization of the new king, and also, of course, women's mysteries were practiced during this time. And finally, there's Samhain, which is the festival of the dead. Now, we must remember. Already, we're getting interesting here. We must remember that the Celtic period that we call a day actually starts in the evening. That's right. The Celtic day starts in the evening at sunset and went through the night and continued through daylight to the next sunset. And that's when the next day would begin. Hence, Imbolc today, of course, technically begins on the evening of January 31st and went on through the day of February 1st. Beltane began on the evening of April 30th and went through the day of May 1st. And of course, Lunasa began on the evening of July 30th and went through the day of August 1st. Drum roll, please. And that means that Samhain began on the evening of October 31st and went through the day of November 1st. This means that Samhain does not technically begin until sunset on October 31st. You want to be technical about it. Now, and it actually continues all the way through to November 1st. I know it's kind of like, wait a minute, you mean all those early trick or treaters? Don't ruin it for them, who will go all trick or treating before before the sun sets, because for safety concerns, and I get that. Well, they're technically not making their rounds on Halloween. It actually is the day before until that sun actually sets. This, by the way, the same concept does apply to the Christianized holiday, as we shall see when it is introduced at first. Interesting stuff, huh? Already, I'm just rattling everybody. Hopefully, everybody's happy. Smile, right? Accordingly, the celebrations of Imbolc, Beltane, Lunasa, Samhain were positioned at the halfway point between the equinox and the solstice. The idea is that Imbolc is midway between the midwinter solstice and the spring equinox. Beltane is midway between the spring equinox and the midsummer solstice. Lunasa is midway between the midsummer solstice and the autumn equinox, and you guessed it right. And Samhain is midway between the autumn equinox and the midwinter solstice. And of course, technically, again, if these holidays were intended to be in the middle of each solar event, let's just play technically, as things move, it's called recession. Imbolc will actually be on February 6th, Beltane will be on May 6th, Lunasa will be on August 6th, and Samhain would be on November 6th. But we're not going to do that. Okay, so let's keep on going. You're like, wow, you're just playing with the calendar. Well, I'm just playing with technicalities. Does it matter? No, it's not. It doesn't matter because it's all about the spirit of Halloween. Oh yeah, there is a spirit about Halloween. We'll talk about that too. Okay, we've got spirit. Yes, we do. We've got spirit. How about you? Yeah, okay. Yeah, we all got spirits here. Good. We're all in good spirits. It's better bad spirits. After this conversation, you'll probably want to have some spirits, right? Okay, so let's keep on going, shall we? So, according to the Celtic belief, Samhain was the time when the good god, known as Dagda, the tribal father god by the Irish, and the great queen by the name of Morrigan, the goddess of war, magic, and darkness, they mate as she is over the river Eunice. Okay, so that's kind of the story. Now, the name Dagda derives from the Proto-Celtic word Dagawils, which has Indo-European roots. It literally means the good God. Right? Literally means the good God. And so there we have it. Also, he's known as Ferben, the Horn Man. Dagda usually carries two sacred tools, the cauldron and the club, and is often accompanied by a magic harp, except when he goes off the battle, or now what happens is, according to Irish belief, Ireland was inhabited by two different groups of people. The first were known as the Fomerians. They wore their hair long, they had very dark eyes, and they carried long and slender golden bronze spears. They are a supernatural race. Sometimes they're very, very mysterious, sometimes hostile. Accordingly, it is said they are under the world of men, according to the earliest reference to them from the 7th century CE. But they are also understood as being under the water. Some early understandings of them have them having the heads of goats. Sometimes they're depicted as having one eye, one arm, and one leg. But in other cases, they're understood as being quite beautiful, darkly beautiful, and supposedly from the age of before the flood. This is, of course, Irish stories now mixing with other stories besides that. Now, accordingly, there was a second group that's known as the Tuatha De Danann. Tuatha De Danann, uh, they were a race of golden-haired, blue-eyed people, and they didn't fight with these spears, the thin spears. They fought with blunt and heavy spears. Now, accordingly, the Tuatha De Danann, these are pre-Christian Irish deities. Of course, later on, during the Christian age, they claim that they are the fallen angels. Um, they are part of the fairy folk later on as well. In many cases, these two different supernatural graces are in conflict with one another. This is all part of the Indo-European background, where you have the earlier Titans that are in conflict with the Olympians, or in the Norwegian folklore, of course, the Aesir and the Vinar, right? Or when it comes to India, northern India, Vedic tradition, right? You have the Devas and the Asuras, right? So this is the same kind of thing that repeats itself. Remember, Indo-Europeans are all related together in different ways. Okay, so anyway, so what happens is these two races come into conflict. And the story goes as follows. Dagda, he was the high priest of the golden haired people. And he had a golden harp. It was beautiful. It was covered in jewels. Now, he would play this harp right before battle to get everybody ready to go. And so then they went on the attack, according to the story. But what happened is one day they're going into battle. Some Fomorian chieftains, they actually took the harp from them. And even though Dagda was close in pursuit, they took his harp and they shut it up in the castle. Ah, that'll take away that power from him, right? And the power to inspire the troops of the Tuatha De Danann, right? So what does he do? Well, what he does is that he just simply calls out to his harp, and he says, "Come to me, O harp." And immediately the harp recognizes his master's call, and it moves swiftly over to him, and of course kills all the people in between. uh, you know, and so then he plays three chords. And first chord is the music of tears, the music of tears. And all, when they hear this, they begin to weep, women and children, as well as the great warriors. Next, he plays the music of mirth. And everybody begins to laugh, and they laugh so hard that they drop their weapons. Finally, he plays the music of sleep, where all fell into a slumber. At this point, Dagda left them with his harp, and according to Celtic lore, um, they were able to defeat the Fomorians. So there you have the story, right? In fact, now Dagda's Mystic Club can kill 9 men in one swoop. So he has this great club as well. And it's interesting because one end of his club is used to kill, but the handle is used to do the opposite. It's used to revive. So one side to kill, one side to revive. So he has the power of life and the power of death just through his club. Isn't that fascinating, right? So you're going, what does this have to do with Halloween? Everything. Oh, okay. Now already we're dealing with a transition between two different worlds. In this case, it's a transition between the Fomorians and the Tuatha De Danann, these two mythical races of beings in Ireland. So this is already this is connected to Samhain. We're going to go a little bit further here because according to Irish legend, Dagda replaced Nuada as the all high god of the Tuatha De Danann. By the way, it's spelled Tuath. I listened to lots of Celtic the recordings. The th is silent. Yeah, so it's Tua, and you stop there. Tuatha De Danann. This is translated as people or tribe of the goddess Danu. Danu, of course, is a goddess, it's Proto-Indo-European. We have lost completely the mythology that's connected to this goddess. Nothing has survived, but we do know what the root means in Proto-Indo-European. It means to run and to flow in Proto-Indo-European, to run or to flow. Very interesting because the Indo-Europeans, remember, they started in the Caucasus Mountains, they swept across Europe, and of course, obviously ended up on the Isles and eventually Ireland. Why? Because it's the same route as the river known as Danube. Oh, okay, that was interesting. Yeah, so it's the same route. So you can see how this goddess, in a sense, moved from east to west. I love tracing words and ideas as they move across of Europe and other places. Okay, so what will happen here is that he becomes the king. Now, just prior to the war against the Fomorians over Ireland, Dagda met with the goddess of war, and of course, other things besides that. Her name is Morrigan. Now, the Mor in Morrigan can mean many different things in the Indo-European language. It can mean terror. It can mean monstrousness, and it is directly connected with the word nightmare. Hence, the idea of a night terror. Okay, you see that's Morrigan. In fact, in German and Scandinavian, and Polish and Croatian and Russian, the word Mara is related to the spirit that gives nightmares. In fact, in amongst the Germanic folk, Mara happens to be a goblin who rides on somebody's chest as they sleep, and as she rides on their chest, he gives them nightmares, nightmare, right? Of course, in Croatian myth folklore, she happens to be a beautiful woman that is much like a succubus and goes to men and takes care of them as well as gives them nightmares in the end. And of course, the old Norse legends, there is a Finnish sorceress by the name of Buddha, and she's actually hired by the wife of the king, Vanlandi, to kill him. Apparently, his wife doesn't like him too much, and so she basically says in the text that she egg rides him to death. In fact, it describes Mara as treading upon him, stamping on him, stampeding upon him, much like a horse would stampede on somebody, giving him nightmares. And Akari says that he cries out for help. And his men rush to him as he's having this nightmare. And they quickly hold his head because Mara seems to be attacking his head. And then she stamps on his feet. And then they grab his feet and she stamps on his head. And yeah, he dies. And so that's the end of him. So this pretty vigorous amount of stories here, right? She does something else, this Mara, the spirit. What she does is that, of course, she's Mara in general, this species of nightmare givers, right? So there's not just one, there's like a whole species of them. They're often shown as riding horses, which is fascinating, right? and they're usually pretty frenzied. They ride the horses at night. But the after effects is fascinating. If you have encountered one of these Mara, one of these female nightmare givers, your hair is left curly. Right. Yeah. So what happens is they tangle your hair for every victim. Um, I don't know how they're going to do with me, but for those who have hair, they tangle it up. In fact, apparently, when they come across trees, the spirits of the trees, they give the spirits of the trees nightmares as well. And that's why, according to belief, um, trees that have been given nightmares have twisted branches. All right. We're still talking about Halloween. We still are. We're talking about the early origins. You just haven't heard any of these stories, have you? Because, all right, here we go. So we have Mora or Mara, which is, of course, the nightmare part. Begon means queen. So Mora again means queen of the mares or queen of these nightmare or these creatures, right? Or it can be translated as nightmare queen, right? Some sects like use phantom queen, but there you have it, right? So according to the Battle of Magharit text, when Dagda arrives to meet Morrigan, Morrigan is washing herself with one foot firmly planted on each side of the Unius River. So she's on two different sides of the river. The day of their meeting was a lucky one because they met, that's right, all these stories are kind of rolling together, on Samhain. That's right. They met on Samhain and they had their special relations right there and then, as she was on with one foot on the river, on one side of the river, and one foot on the other. They are making out. Yes. And so Morrigan agrees to convince the Irish magicians to side on the side the Tuatha Dé Danann against the Fomorians after this deed is done and destroying their king, Edech, by stealing the blood of his heart and the kidneys of his valor. This is the early story of Samhain. It's origins in Ireland, right? And the idea of transitions. You know, this is like two different races, supernatural races, and then you have, of course, two sides of the river, and these two gods coming together, right? This is all connection of this idea of liminal spaces in between. These are transitions, are they not? So let's go a little bit further. So in some versions of this Irish myth, Dagda also mated with Boen Boy, which is the goddess of the river Boyne. Now, while Boyne was always the wife of Nicton, the god of the water, she was said to have an illicit affair with Dagda and resulted in the birth of Angus, who is the god of love. Now, this is Samhain story number 2. I mean, the Angus story is another Samhain story? Yeah. You're here to hear the early stories? You're going to hear them. Okay, Angus, obviously, what happens here is that, well, of course, they keep this affair kind of quiet. They magically keep it covered. Now, what happens now is the son of goddess Boyne, of course, his name is Angus, as I mentioned. Remember, this is the result of the affair that Dagda had with the river Boyne, the goddess of the river Boyne. So what happens is this, is that Angus, he's connected, as I said, to the powers of romantic and sexual love. But he falls in love with Caer Ibermaith, which, by the way, just means yewberry. And, you know, the yewberry just happens to be connected with death. Thereby, she becomes literally a fruit or offspring of death. Now, I think this is interesting because here you have Angus, who is who is connected to love, to life, and he falls in love with what? Death, right? Okay, and now, of course, obviously her father, Ethel Annabel, it was the king of a place known as Si or Sai, which is known as a mound uh, where the spirits of the dead frequent. In fact, they were called, in many cases, burial mounds by this name. So there is definitely a connection with death here. So how does he meet her? I mean, does he just meet her and see her? No, no. He meets her in his dreams as he sleeps at night. Angus sees this beautiful young girl and he falls deeply in love with her. And in fact, she visits him night after night. Angus becomes obsessed. He has fallen in love with her, fallen in love with this death, right? And so what happens is that his mother and his father, Dagda, they look for this woman somewhere in the Irish countryside. They don't find her. Finally, a certain king, Bodert of Munster, the region of Ireland, found her. So when Angus seeks to you know meet with her, unfortunately, the father says, "No, no, no, I don't want this connection to happen. I don't want you, this god of romantic love and life, getting together with my daughter, of course, who is a representation of death. No, no. Are you seeing the transitional aspect already? Yeah, okay, here we go. Sound what's happening. Here it goes. So what happens now is that he actually chains his daughter to a wall with 150 other women who have the gift of transformation. So she's chained to a wall with 150 other women because she's a shapeshifter. You see, she has a shape shifting ability. It happens only on, guess what day it happens? Yeah, it only happens on the day of Samhain. On the day of Samhain, she changes shape. Happens. So one Samhain, she turns into a swan, and she will remain a swan for the rest of the year and into the next year until the next Samhain. And then at that point, she will turn into a human, and then she'll be a human for that year all the way up through the next Samhain, and then she'll turn into a swan again. You guys got it? Well, unfortunately, she was right in the middle of the swan phase. That's kind of his swan song. And the reason why she's chained up with 150 other women is because all of them have this gift of transforming, it's not, or a curse of transforming into a swan as well. So the idea is that when Angus arrives to meet with her, as she happens to be in her swan form this year, well, he has to choose between 150 swans. So she is one out of 149 swans. And of course, that's pretty upsetting. So what happens is he's told that he had to pick her out from the group. You know, and but you know what he does? He chooses correctly. He chooses the right swan, and he turns himself into a swan, and he meets with her, and the two fly off, and they go around the Loch Belbragan. They go around this lake 3 times, and when they do that, they make everybody go to sleep. And then, of course, they make love in Angus's palace. And of course, this idea transfers over again to Samhain. The idea of the Samhain transformation is not to be lost. This is a threshold time between, yes, love, but it's also a time of death. I suppose that many have never heard that story. So you've seen some of the background of Samhain. Now there's another story. I love these stories, right? A further Samhain story involves the destruction of the, it's not very happy, a magical hill known as Tara, right? This is the home of the gods and high kings of Ireland, but it's being destroyed constantly. In fact, it is being destroyed over and over again by this goblin by the name of Aelin, and he does this over and over again. Um, in fact, quite a few times, and to the point where they need to do something about this. And so, what happens is that he plays the harp and he plays it beautifully. He lulls everybody to sleep, and then he burns Tara to the ground. Um, and he has, of course, this power of fire. He does this for 23 years in a row. So, so this hero by the name of Finn MacGumeo, who, with his bag of magic weapons, he decides to defeat the goblin. And so what he does is when Alien he casts the spell to put everybody to sleep, what happens is that Finn, what he does is he puts a spear to his head so that he's in constant pain. so so that when the spell is cast, this pain in his head wakes him up. And then what he does, of course, is he kills the goblin with the same spear. And that's the end of that. But once again, there's a Samhain theme, right? Every single Samhain, Tara is destroyed and through destruction, but the remedy happens. Good news, Finn saves the day in the end. Now, it's interesting because the hill of Tara itself is still there in Ireland. This mountain is aligned with the midpoint between the spring equinox and the autumn equinox, of course, pinpointing to Imbolc, which is, of course, and then, of course, another part is connected, points towards the in between the summer and winter solstice, right? The summer. And so this is, of course, is Samhain, right? So it's interesting because the directions are there in there. And it's interesting also because today, it was moved here in 1798. You happen to have the Stone of Destiny there, which is pretty cool. It's the speaking stone. It wasn't originally there. It was moved from another site. But it was moved there in 1798, as I said, to commemorate a battle where 400 rebels were buried. But what happens is that this is the so-called speaking stone. Anyway, the Celts, which of course includes everybody from northern France, Ireland, and England, and Scotland, and Wales, and Brittany, believe that during Samhain, the border between this world and the other world became very thin, permitting spirits, both harmless and harmful, to pass through. In fact, many of them believe that the mystical doors of the burial mounds were opened, freeing the spirits of ancestors and family and old friends and even enemies upon the realm of the living. Now, while magic kept them away through various means throughout the year, well, during the time of Samhain, this was a period where the spirits were offered a free pass of entry into this world. And, they just flowed across, right? No magical passwords were needed to enter or leave these worlds because they were virtually overlapping upon one another. In fact, better said, the two worlds just happening right now, slowly, gradually, are collapsing against one another, overlapping. And so these worlds are coming as one, and the spirits now just simply to the other side. Of course, to the Celts, the mundane and the supernatural were always closely connected. But Samhain was still this special time. Now, a variety of spirits and creatures were said to move about during Halloween. One folk story told of an old witch named Alison Gross, who placed one of her spells upon a certain young man. This is an early one. Oh, Alison Gross, that lives in yon tower, the ugliest witch in the north country. She turned me into an ugly worm and guard me toddle around a tree. But as it fell out last hollow event, when the searly fairly court was riding by, the queen lighted down on a galley bank not far from the tree where I want to lie. She changed me again to my own proper shape, and I no more toddle about the tree. Now, I tell this story. Well, once again, this is an echo of earlier stories before, and and I'll go there. Most people, again, this is something we're not oftentimes talked about. This is a transformative period of time, but this time could also mean your own transformation. Did you notice earlier on, you have this shape shifting theme going on? Yeah, right? It's at the heart of the early Halloween, the Samhain legends. And I think we've kind of lost this as time went on. This is a later echo of that idea. Okay. So, to ward the evil away, not only did they have the symbol of protection placed before their homes in various locations, which we'll talk about, don't worry, but they often disguised themselves as in rather scary ways. Later on, these will be scary masks and outfits, so that the spirit may think that they were, likewise spirits and leave them alone. As we dig earlier on, it turns out that most of these disguises, people are wearing animal heads and animal skins. So maybe not quite looking like fellow spirits, maybe just not looking like humans. Nothing but animals here, even Salome, nothing but animals, which I find that's a little other interesting twist. But yes, it is true. Later on, we'll have the various disguises. Eventually, the villagers, they'll form processions and they will wear costumes. And the idea is they will lead the people, I should say, lead the spirits out of the village. So they'll wear these outfits and they'll have a procession. And hopefully, as they leave the village, spirits will follow. Well, that's sort of the story, right? In Scotland, ghosts were impersonated by young men, and they oftentimes wore white. They wore masks, and sometimes they simply just covered up their faces, and they would leave food out for their ancestors as well as for various travelers to appease the spirits. Now, the first listing of wearing masks, the earliest reference in Scotland is from 1585. That's doesn't, but it still echoes earlier stories and legends. However, in Ireland, this looks like much of Samhain is coming from Ireland, right? In Ireland, you have the hobby horse that goes way back, and I dug through a whole bunch of pretty interesting materials, and I found some folklorists from the 19th century, and them going in and talking about local customs and going back further in Ireland. And I found this pretty interesting. In Southern Ireland, and this goes even further back, they have what's called the hobby horse. This is there's two people that dress up. One's the horse front, one's the horse end. This is Laban. This is the white mare, who happens to be the person who's at the head, happens to be the head of the ceremonies, according to the source, and led the young along this procession. And they would go around and they would recite verses dedicated to the gods and the goddesses. And they would go from farm to farm. But especially, they wanted to appeal to a Celtic god by the name of Muk-Allah. Muk-Allah, so Muk-Allah. And what happens is as you go from farm to farm, you're supposed to, when you see this procession, you're supposed to give them food. So farmers would see this procession headed by this hobby horse, and they would give them milk, or they give them butter or eggs or wheat. And sometimes they'll give them wool. But if the farmer was selfish, did not give this procession moving along anything, then there was a tragedy afoot. Something had happened to the farmer. So it was auspicious, very important that you do so. And you can see once again how these stories and legends will then cross over to Scotland and then move down to England into this idea of these processions leaving villages and the idea of the spirits leaving with them. It's a gradual change, a gradual evolution. Now, not all the spirits were viewed as troublesome. I mean, they were, in many cases, spirits of dead friends and family. And so, and they were to be, comforted by the Samhain bonfires. Here, the living would symbolically feast with the friendly dead. This occasion was called the Feast of the White-Haired One, or of the Snow Goddess, or sometimes simply called the Feast of the Dead. Now, of course, if you take a look at this word, Morgenfinn, or Morgfinn in English, but Morgenfinn in the Irish, this simply means, of course, goddess of the fair hair or the white hair. And this goddess apparently arrived from Munster, a region of Ireland. We do know a little bit about this goddess. She was the wife of the High King by the name of Echort, and she was the first wife, and she gave him 3 sons. Then he took on a second wife, and she didn't like his son too well, Karen. And there's lots of stories. So that the wife's name is Karen. His name was Niall of the 9 Hostages. And what happens is there's all these disputes and fights, because she's the he's the son of the second wife, and she's pretty upset by it. But when it comes time for the change of power of High King, this is another story woven in, because this is the reason why it's called this. So you want to listen up, right? So her brother Crimthon is supposed to be the next High King after Echort, right after her husband. But she doesn't want her brother to be king, the High King. No, no, no. She wants her son to be the next king, next High King of Ireland. So what she does is she mixes a poison, and she's going to give this drink to her brother. The brother goes, "Hey, how do I know this is not poison?" And she goes, "I'll show you." And she drinks the poisoned potion. And she acts like she's okay. He's like, "Oh, okay, I'll try it then." And he drinks and he dies. But she dies too. And you know what day it was? Drum roll, please. The day this happened was Samhain. Oh, now you got it. Now I go, oh, that's why it's called the Feast of the White-Haired One, dedicated to Mongfin. If you want spelling, I'll give it Moingfhinne. And then the English is Mongfind. Interesting, huh? So there you have it. So once again, saying, wow, this is another Samhain story that we didn't expect to hear. Oh, I know. Now, Samhain was a time of the gathering of the rest of the crops. Everything else that was left unharvested after Samhain was to be abandoned and was considered unlucky. That it was a taboo. And so it was enforced by these mystical spirits known as the Puka. Sometimes viewed as a goblin, sometimes viewed as a fairy. So it kind of goes back and forth between the two, right? Now they thrived at night, and they found delight tormenting humans. They were, like I said, more prone to uh, causing problems. Yet at the same time, they were known to give good advice, and sometimes they could keep people out of harm's way. Still, the puka made sure that the crops were contaminated after sowing. So this is the idea: when crops go bad, you know, uh, the puka are the ones that make it go bad and make it, make it an unhealthy path, right? Of course, in Irish beliefs, the puka demand their own share of the harvests, so it's left over for them. Okay, now they were known to be shapeshifters as well. Once again, we're back to the shapeshifting theme. Sometimes they were a goat or a rabbit or a bull or a dog. Sometimes they were a black horse and, of course, a goblin. But you can always recognize the puka because it- no matter what they turn into, they always had orange eyes, and their hair or fur was always dark. That's how you can recognize a puka. They could also transform into an eagle. Of course, it will be a black eagle, and they had this huge wingspan, and they swoop down. They like to swoop down on unsuspecting travelers who are just walking along, pick them up, grab them, and then carry them over off and throw them into the mud. Oh, and of course, you could never insult a puka, although some people who are thrown in the mud were tempted to do so, because if they did so, this would be bad luck, right? I had to tell you a puka story. So, um, one tale tells of the puka that was recorded by Lady Wilde, 1821 to 1896. Talking about how one day a farmer's son by the name of Fadrick was able to actually see a puka. They're typically invisible to the eyes. But the first thing he did after crying out, "Oh, it's a puka," is that he offered him a coat to wear. The first thing he did was kindness. The puka was touched and so transformed himself into a young bull and told him to come to the old mill that night to see what he was doing there. So the first night he didn't fall asleep, but the next, when he woke up in the morning, he saw that, hey, there was a whole grain of flour that was ground up for him. The next night, he did the same as Puka. The Puka then brought in a whole bunch of the other Puka, and they're constantly grinding grain for him. He became wealthy. He had all the grain he needed to distribute to other people. And then finally, one day, he gave the original Puka an outfit of silk, and he was filled with gratitude. And the Puka left being thankful with all the other Puka to travel the world. But he was thankful, and the guy was rich anyway, so it didn't matter. Uh, when he got married, the puka actually left him a golden cup filled with drink to guarantee a happy marriage. So puka are not all bad, right? They can be very good too. Puka were also known to offer prophecies for the coming year during this celebration. What? Yes, yes. So we know that during Samhain, the puka were able to offer prophecies. So another important connection to this holiday. For example, at Leinster, a plump, sleek, terrible steed annually came to the villagers on Samhain and provided an oracle, offering up intelligent and proper answers to those who consulted it concerning all that would befall them until November the next year. And of course, they would offer up gifts to this puka in disguise, in horse disguise, to thank him or her, it for its gift. It's interesting, right? So, yeah, so the puka are very much part of the ancient Samhain stories. The Irish puka are known as pucks, and then of course you have Cornish ones as well. It's interesting that um, even fishermen gave offerings to the puka. Um, they leave it on the sand at night, a portion of their catch. Now, Samhain was not only a transitional time when it came to the growing seasons, but also when it came to tending livestock. So, what happens here? As winter approached, early pastoralists could not feed the entire herd because of the limited amount of food available during the tough winter cold months. So, what they had to do is they had to kill off part of the herd and keep the best for breeding purposes. The, Now, the part of the herd that was killed and salted for winter storage um, was slaughtered, of course, obviously on the occasion of Samhain. That's right. So Samhain is a time where they'd slaughter the excess animals and prepare them, salt them for the winter. At this period of time, also bonfires were part of the festivities. In fact, now the fire was ignited from branches that were collected from some magical grove or location. What happens? Many believe that this bonfire served as a representation of the sun. So the bonfire represents the sun. And so keeping the fires burning bright, the idea is that through the sympathetic magic, the sun itself would burn brighter and longer into the winter months, continue its power of growth, and holding back longer the season of death and decay. So the idea is you want to build a big bonfire. You want this thing to blaze because the more it blazes, the more through sympathetic magic it energizes the sun and gives it its energy so that it will be stronger throughout the winter months, right? And more life-giving, right? Obviously, this bonfire served another purpose, and that is it served to dispose of the bones of the slaughtered livestock. So they burned the bones there to take care of it. Now, sometimes some say, all the time, depends. There's different views on this. Two bonfires would be built side by side, and there was an elaborate ceremony orchestrated about the twin fires with people and their livestock walking between walking between them in a purification ritual. Okay, so both the smoke and the ash from these fires were believed to have magical cleansing properties. Those who went before the flames were also to take a sprig of fir, place it into the bonfire, and bring the consecrated flames back to their homes with their hearths relit. In this way, this fire magic could benefit every individual family. So that means when they're lighting these bonfires or bonfire, their fire in their own hearth, in their own home, was put out. The year is over. It's time to put out that flame. The idea is they put out all the hearths, which are kindling, the central communal bonfire. But the idea is what you're supposed to do is you take a sprig from this life-giving new fire, and you go back to your hearths and you relight the fire to represent a new beginning, a new birth, and so for the year to come. So that's kind of the ritual. Another common practice was, I want to mention more fun things. These bonfires, as we know, science, right? Lots of bugs are attracted to these bonfires. And the bugs attracted? Bats. So lots of bats would then swerve and try to eat the bugs. So bats start to be connected to the season of Samhain and this era, this concept in general. Okay, another common practice was divination that also involved in a communion-like feast with both food and drink. Now, one rather ominous form of divination involved placing stones around the Samhain bonfire. Each of these stones were said or were supposed to represent a person in the village. So, so these stones, each one representing, somebody. Some have imagined that these stones were even painted or dressed to look like various individuals in the village, which that would be kind of creepy. But anyway, so what happens is this: they would leave these stones around the fire. Uh, then the villagers would hold their torches and run around the bonfire, actually this way, run around the bonfire, building up the magical energies, hoping for the best. The next morning, they look at the stones. If any of these stones were disturbed, they would read them in a way to suit an oracle. So the movement of these stones would mean something. And if the stone was knocked over, it would mean a disaster for that person or death. Now, there's many anthropologists, of course, Fraser is one of them, believe that earlier times, if anybody's stone was completely knocked over, that person was sacrificed to the gods or the goddess. But there was human sacrifice, we know, because hello, archaeology, Wheeler's Way, early on, that occurred amongst the Celts, just like everybody else. So, but this is a possibility, maybe. Now, moving on, do we feel like we understand Samhain? We'll go back to some of the Samhain rituals. We're not completely done, but let's talk about the next overlay. The next overlay, because what happens is that Halloween is a combination of these different traditions. Let's move. Let's go on to the Romans. Now, when the Romans, they conquered northwestern Europe, they proceeded to assimilate aspects of this Celtic holiday with their own festival. That festival was dedicated to Pomona. Of course, you hear the word Pomona, you think of the city. It was named after the goddess Pomona. This is the goddess of fruits and trees. One, of course, of the prominent symbols of the goddess Pomona was the symbol of the apple. And of course, the tradition for bobbing for apples on Halloween arise via Roman games played during this period. Now, the name of the goddess Pomona derives from the Latin word pomone, which means fruit, and apparently was simply a wood nymph at first connected to the orchards and loved to frequent fruit trees, with apples being her very favorite one. She is sometimes shown holding a cornucopia of fruit. With her ability to give much abundance, she's very beautiful, and many seek after her. But of course, she refuses them all, including her fellow woody-like gods like Sylvanus and Picus. So Vertumnus, who happens to be god of the seasons, related to plant growth, he in gardens and orchards, he falls in love with her, but he knows that she's not going to listen to his proposal. So he transforms himself into an old woman and goes up to her, up to Pomona, and says, "Hey, that Vertumnus guy, he's pretty great. Marry him." So she's tricked. He's pretty, and so they get married, and together, of course, they bring fruit unmeasured. Now, the festival dedicated to Pomona was celebrated on August 13th every year. So August 13th every year. But when the Romans arrived in Britain in 43 CE, occupying much of that isle all the way up to the year 410 CE, they merged this festival with the Celtic Samhain. They come together. Got it? Celebrate at the same time. Okay, well, sort of. You see, the Roman writer by the name of Pliny the Elder states that the Celtic New Year begun in July as opposed to October, November. But, he could have made a mistake, maybe, right? So now, but the idea is that when the apple was seen in the Celtic regions, they the idea of the you cut open an apple. What do you see? When you cut open an apple, you see um, you see five seeds that appears like a pentagram. All right. Now, of course, pentagrams go way back. I mean, they go back to around 3,500 BCE. The Greeks, obviously, Pythagoras, right? Um, this is like a meaning of mutual well-being and so forth. Did you know that the pentagram was even used for the symbol of Jerusalem during the Hellenistic Judaism period? Yeah, yeah, all the way up to around 150 BCE, 300 BCE. So pentagrams are common. And of course, obviously, this is the point of controversy of pentagrams this early amongst the Celts. However, don't worry, uh, you still have the fiveness idea. The fiveness is a big deal amongst the Celts, and it goes all the way back. So they see the five seeds within the apple that will absolutely mean something in a magical sense. You're going to have the fiveness. Of course, there's a story from Cormac's Cup of Gold. This is an Irish story of this royal fortress, and there's this well in the middle that has five salmon in it, and there are five streams that flow from this great well, and this is the well of what? The well of knowledge, and it's said to burble the sweetest music. So you got the fives there, and obviously Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Of course, Ireland has what? It has five major roads, five provinces, five paths of the law. I mean, you see fives everywhere. So yes, they'll see the apples, and it's kind of hard. So they will see a magical, special meaning to this that will be understood as also pentagrams as well. So, and this is connected to obviously fertility and used for. So what will happen is that during this period of time, game of Bobby for apples then became a fertility ritual, played between boys and girls to determine who would marry who and when. The first person to bite into the apple was next to be married, according to this folkloric story. If the girl and boy bite into the same apple or two different apples at the same time, it was a perfect match. Got it? Yeah. So there you have it. Right now, what will happen is that in 1902, the British author by the name of Davenport Adams records many Celtic fairy lore stories talking about divination. And I want to read this one. He says, the apples are thrown into a tub of water, and you endeavor to catch one in your mouth as they bob around and around in a provoking fashion. When you have caught one, you peel it carefully and pass a long strip of peel thrice, sunwise, around your head, after which you throw it over your shoulder, and it falls to the ground in the shape of the initial letter of your true love's name. You're what? I want to hear that again. So when you have caught one, you peel it carefully. So you peel the apple, and you pass the long strip of the peel thrice, sunwise, around your head. And then you throw it over your shoulder. And supposedly, you see how these long little peel, whatever shape that letter appears in, that's the first initial of your first love's name. So it had a certain appeal. Okay, stopping. Also related to the bobbing of apples, you have a custom known as the snap apple, where an apple was hung from a string. Obviously, we talked about this. Still another ritual was to place nutshells into a fire after pronouncing the love interest name. If the nutshells burned steadily, and a long-lasting love was predicted. But if it snapped away in the hearth, this love was only a passing fancy. So Basically, is that yeah. So if you throw it to the fire and it just keeps burning, it's like wow, that's true love. But if it goes snap, crackle, pop, guess what? It's a passing fancy, nothing to see here, right? They call it Snap Apple Night when they celebrate. Another Roman custom, this is important to the Pomona now combining with Samhain. Another Roman custom was that eventually would assimilate into Samhain was the days the Romans set aside for the dead, which eventually evolved into the Christian era to be confined to Samhain and then turned to Halloween. For the Romans, certain days were designated to honor the graves of the deceased. Initially, that which was called the 9 days of sorrow was observed after the person's death. If the body was cremated, the flames were doused with water or wine, and then the ashes needed to have time to dry up. So during this time, um, these ashes were collected and placed into an urn. On the last day of this observance, a sacrifice to the deceased was made, and anything promised in the will became official, whether it was inherited or inheritance and so forth of personal items. Well, after 9 days, the ritual mourning concluded. If the person happened to be the spouse of the deceased, of course, uh, they had to keep mourning for the next 10 months. Another day that will be combined is the departed birthday. This is called the Days Noctimus. And once again, what will happen is that you arrive on the day of their birthday and actually light by their tombs. And then what you do is would have a feast for them, which is known as a refrigerium. So you would eat at the graveside with these lights around the tomb, and typically you would eat their favorite foods. Does this sound like another day that would come later on? Yeah, the Romans are celebrating a day that's very similar to the Day of the Dead that we see arising from Mexico and other places. Does that make sense? But the Latins have this too, right? You see how things are going to start to combine along. Now, they also had a feast for parents and kinfolk that was celebrated on February 13th to the 21st. It's called the Parentalia. And once again, this is a refrigerium. You would have a feast by the tombs. You also had another day called the Feralia and the Rosalia, where you put flowers, roses by those you loved. But of course, not all the dead were properly buried. And so they ended up as ghosts. So on May 9th, on May 11th, and May 13th, you have the Lemuria, with the unsettled and sometimes malevolent dead would prowl around your house. So what do you do? Well, they would appear around midnight. At this time, household gathered around, and everyone would take off their shoes, and they walked barefoot upon the ground. Next, the worshiper, who is the head of the household, usually the paterfamilias, was to make the sign of his thumb in the middle of his forehead with washed hands from a clean spring water. And then he was to take black beans and throw them with an averted face, saying 9 times, Hec ego meto, his redemo mique misque fabis, which means, these I cast with thee, I redeem me and mine. And of course, obviously, it is believed that the spirits would be running outside the house, chasing after these beans. And then he touched the water and mixed the entire household, flashed bronze pots and declared, the ghost of my fathers and ancestors, be gone, be gone. And so this was a festival of keeping those night prowlers and those unwanted dead away from the household, as I said. So we'll see how this combines with Halloween in a few moments. So, but let's before we go there though, let's talk about the name Halloween. Well, the "een" part is basically abbreviated for even, which means evening, right? And hollow means holy. And so the complete word is Holy Evening or All Hallows Eve. Now, of course, this later on becomes representative of a Christian holiday held on November 1st that will overlay the Celtic celebration and the Roman celebration. And of course, it will be understood within a new matrix of ideas, but still using the ancient symbolism. So you're going to have now the Pomona festivities combining with the Celtic Samhain with this Christian overlay. Don't worry, I'll give you exact details of when this happened. And I'll tell you who did it. So you'll know exactly. So hold on. So, for instance, the day remains in honor of the dead, but within a Christian context. So this is turned into a day to honor the saints. On this day, Christians believe that the saints and redeemed sinners were restored to heaven. This was also an important evening of reconciliation, whereby souls who were worthy of achieving sainthood, but kind of forgotten because of human rather than divine fallacy, were honored and named as saints. Adjoining the festival of All Hallows was also All Saints' Day. This was another Christian festival celebrated on November 2nd, dedicated to all the dead, whether they were redeemed or not. And this became known as All Souls' Day. Okay. So All Souls Day or All Saints. So what will happen here is, so when did this overlay take place? Well, and we have a name. You guys ready? So the guy who did all this, his name is Pope Gregory the First. Now, he decided to change the Christian missionary policy from tearing down pagan sites to reforging them for Christian worship in the year 601 CE. So if a sacred tree, for example, was an important focal point, rather than follow the policy of knocking it down, chopping it down, like St. Martin of Tours did, right? Or St. Boniface in Germany, who's cutting down on the sacred oaks. No, the idea is what we're going to do is not take away their focal point. We're simply going to reconsecrate this tree to Christ or to a saint. And this is an actual decision that was made in 601. So you can see how the earlier traditions will then slip in. Hence, Samhain, which was dedicated to the dead, became more and more dedicated to specifically the Christian dead, and of course, by default, the saints. Good, okay. So you have this gradual change. Samhain is changing. Next thing, the Roman day of Lemuria. It's a problem. It's this dark holiday, the Romans. So what happens is Pope Boniface, what he does on May 13th, 609 or 610, is that he changes Lemuria from this dedication to these creatures and these dark spirits and the forgotten dead. He reconsecrates it, dedicated to the Blessed Virgin and all the martyrs. So he does so again on May 13th, 609. On this date, this Pope also rededicated the Blessed Virgin and all the martyrs in a Christianization of many of the pantheon of these Roman gods. This is where Roman gods and goddesses and other gods start becoming saints. Even this day became known as All Saints' Day. I know we got a whole bunch of All Saints' Day. Don't worry, we'll clear it up in a little bit. But this day that was Lemuria, that now became celebrated as the day of the Blessed Virgin and the martyrs, was celebrated on May 13th, not November 1st. Not yet. Meanwhile, still on November 1st, you still have another Christianized Samhain that's gradually going through these stages, but still the old Samhain is going on at the same time. So when does this all merge together? I'll give you the date. What? Another date. Pope Gregory now, the fourth in 834, tried to supplant the Roman holiday in connection to the Lemuria that refused to go away with this version of the Christian holiday of All Saints' Day. He's the one who now moves the date from May 13th to November 1st. So what happens? The exact year is 834. Now, this time, this Lemuria that's also dedicated to the saints. Meanwhile, you have over here, you have Samhain that is still kind of being dedicated to the saints. So you have these two saint holidays kind of bouncing around. He basically says, okay, let's move Lemuria because people are still too connected to that date and dedication to evil and the spirits and the unwanted dead. We just got to move the whole date. And he then combines it together. And now Lemuria, which was Lemuria, which is now the saint dedicated to the Mary and the saints, is now as one with Samhain. So the actual day is 834. You guys got it? Wow. If you wanted details, now you know. As for, well, wait a minute. What about All Souls Day? Can you tell me when All Souls Day comes about? Yes, I will. So we have All Saints Day. So what will happen is All Souls Day, it comes about, the story goes, is there's a Saint Odilo. He was an abbot of the powerful Cluny Monastery. This is during the 9th century or the 800s. So it's the same time as Pope Gregory. The story happens that he makes a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and then he's shipwrecked on this inhospitable island. And while exploring this island, well, guess what happens? He falls into a chasm leading to purgatory. And he heard the desperate screams of those lacking redemption and those who are being brutally tortured. The memory haunted this pilgrim even after he was rescued. So what happened is that he begged that Abbot Odilo, he begged that there be some kind of intercession for the tortured souls in purgatory. The abbot agreed to do so, and in fact said, you know what we need to do? This abbot from Cluny says, after hearing this pilgrim story, he says, you know what we need to do? We need to have a day dedicated to it. And this, of course, happens on November 2nd. Now, what will happen is the commoners, many already celebrating various days in memory of the deceased, simply concentrated their activities on this day. And so, for instance, the Roman custom of dinners for the dead, whereby the family would go out and commemorate the deceased by sitting by their graves and having a picnic, in some cases baking special cakes and pouring wine upon the site as a libation in order to feed the souls of their loved ones, was easily transferred to this date. So now all those other rituals I talked about, the Romans did for the dead, that were spread out throughout the Roman calendar, they all get focused now also on November 1st and November 2nd. And so there you have, even though these ideas were initially discouraged, they kept it going on. Sometimes observers would venture beyond the cemetery, going house to house and even village to village with a special hollowed out turnip lantern, the light within symbolizing the souls that were trapped in purgatory. Once again, this purgatory idea now permeates the concept of Halloween. This custom was talked about in the 1500s, but dates way earlier. They would also beg for, as they go around from place to place, these processions holding this lantern. They would also beg for soul cakes. basically made out of square pieces of bread with currants. In Wales, the soul cake was called a dole cake. It was called a dirge cake around Yorkshire. The idea is the more soul cakes they got, the more prayers would be given on behalf of the dead relatives of those who gave them the soul cake. So the idea is, hey, if I give you a soul cake, you're going to pray for my dead relative in purgatory with your prayers to help them get out and go to heaven. Because, if you don't, maybe they're going to slip into the chasm down below. And so this is the idea. And hey, if you give them a lot more, have a lot of soul cakes, they're going to give you a lot of prayers in return. What a deal, right? What a deal. And if you give it to a beggar, wow. I mean, you're going to get even more prayers because they have nothing to lose, right? They even sang an All Souls Carol. It's not a Christmas carol, but it's a Soul Souls Carol. And I'm going to sing, we're not going to sing, I'm going to say this carol to you. It goes as follows. Soul, soul, for a soul cake. I pray you, good missus, a soul cake. An apple, a pear, a plum, or a cherry, or any good thing to make us merry. 1 for Peter, 2 for Paul, 3 for them who made us all. Up with the kettle and down with the pan. Give us good alms, and we'll be gone. Okay, the last line didn't rhyme. It was Gan, but language changes. Anyway, that's the song. And so much in the same way as the Romans, as expressed by Virgil and his Aeneid, medieval Christians believed that the deceased remained in limbo in a holy place after death. This is still the belief today of the Catholic Church. Now, the house-to-house tradition may derive from the 9th century and was called souling, S-O-U-L-I-N-G. And of course, it originated from, guess where, Ireland and then Britain. By the 16th century, there is evidence of souling, this tradition of these processions going about from place to place, spread all the way to Italy. Even Shakespeare mentions it in the Two Gentlemen of Verona in 1593. But there is a connection, or is there a connection? Is there a connection between souling, going from place to place with these soul cakes, singing their songs, right? So getting people out of purgatory. Is there a connection between souling and trick or treat? The idea of begging for soul cakes, and later on, what you're begging for is not soul cakes, it's candy, right? Is there a connection? Well, some scholars say yes. Some scholars say no. But and so the jury's out on this one. But there is lots of traditions that are similar. We can go in there that seem to connect the dots between the two. But there you have it, right? By the time the English and Irish came to the Americas, the practice of sewing had died down in popularity, and it was more popular to go to church in preparation for All Saints Day and All Souls Day after that. But that's you got to thank the Puritans, or don't thank the Puritans for that. Apparently, however, Halloween night was also the time for pranksters. What? Yeah, pranksters. Knocking on doors and very haphazard responses resulted. So this during the 19th century, actually, even as early as the 18th century, you have this tradition of this period of time, November 1st, is a time for tricky people. Sounds like trick or treat is about to come about, huh? Where does it start? Of course, it starts in Scotland. Where else, right? Scottish Highlands. I know you're thinking Ireland, but we're doing tricks now. If you're Scottish, you're going, yay, thank you. So the Scottish Highlands goes back to at least 1736, and then Ireland also. And the idea is this was called Mischief Night. So this custom then crossed over the Atlantic. And so throughout the 19th century, various newspapers talked about all these juveniles doing all these tricks on this day. But when does the trick and the treat come together? Well, we have now this is Scotland again. We may have to thank the Scottish again for this part. For apparently there's a tradition known as guising, which was already in full swing by 1895, which seemed to be, this is where I'm talking about connections. It seemed to be this guising is a leftover tradition of souling. Got it? But and here, people who are now masqueraded are going house to house, and you know what they're asking for? Not soul cakes. They're asking for fruit and cakes. So, am I on mute? Somebody just says I'm on mute. Can you guys hear me? Make sure you guys are able to
I
hear
hear
me.
you. I hear you. Yeah.
Okay. 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 So one person said I was on mute. So okay. So what happens is this. I don't. This is drum roll, please. Right. What happens is that so as opposed to asking for soul cakes, they're going around masqueraded. We're asking for fruit and cakes. I kind of like that. Can we go? Can we do that again? I think that would be great. Can you imagine? You know, giving us fruit and cakes. Because I like cake. I like pie too. Give me pie, just not in the face. Okay, so what happens now is that it looks like it's the Scottish again who are giving us the special gift. Um, they even carried lanterns, in some cases made out of scooped out turnips. So it looks like there's a treat here. You see the treat? I consider cake a treat, fruit a treat. So, but what is it called? Trick or treat? Well, well, the idea, the custom of trick or treating, of giving a treat or a trick, it first appears in a newspaper article from 1911. It's from Kingston, Ontario. So, the Scottish, you got the Canadians, right? Well, it was reported that one of the local Halloween customs included children going door to door singing songs in exchange for candy and nuts. And maybe people got tired of making a big old cake and handing it out and thinking, maybe candy smaller. Maybe that's the switch over, or just the marketing of candy is happening during this time. But what happens now is that, yeah, thank you, Canadians. Go Canada. Now it looks like but it was reported it's one of the traditions. So that means it probably goes further back. It's just reporting. Now, what is it called? Trick or treat. Well, you still have this trick and treat concept happening in Chicago, but they're still called trick or treat. Just like, hey, uh, but spreading through the Americas. But the word trick or treat being used at a regular basis, it appears first in 1927 from Alberta, Canada. And there you have it. So there we have trick or treating. Now, let's do a little bit more if you don't mind. I know this is it's pretty interesting. I want to just go to a few other areas. I know you're dying, and I know that during the question and answer time, you're going to be asking me all these questions. So let's keep on going and maybe answer as many questions as I can ahead of time. Okay, so unless you have any questions right now, but I think we'll hold off. Um, so now what will happen is because Samhain was a time when the dearly departed were remembered, the ancient Celts used to put an image of a skeleton in front of their homes, to remember the dead. For the Celts, the head was the most spiritually powerful part of the body. For the Celts, they believed that the spirit was in the head, not the heart. The spirit was where the faculties of knowledge happened to be. This, by the way, is echoed throughout the world. It's actually demonstrated that we see even through archaeology during the Paleolithic and Neolithic age, is that it seems like the head is esteemed as being where the spirit or the soul is. Hence the reason why they'll have this practice of cutting off the head at burial because they don't want the reanimation going on there. So what will happen is that long and the short of it is that there's going to be well, I'll just go here. So not necessarily implying that the Celts were, ahead of their time. A bad joke, sorry. But they held to the view of the special sacredness of the head and felt that it represents a power to scare evil spirits away, lurking about in the middle of the night. And so there's lots of British and Welsh and Irish stories that mention the brazen head. Some scholars believe that this is connected to a practice of headhunting, whereby heads were nailed to the lintel of the door and brought into the house to speak their wisdom. And of course, the idea is, that the human bodies, especially the heads incorporated into houses, will give it some sort of power. We see this in ancient Jericho. We see this in Katahuyak. They will put the bones of the ancestors literally in the walls and under the floor. So there is something there. But of course, the topic of human sacrifice does rear its ugly head. Pun intended. Anyway, stop. So you do have that, and I mean, but the idea of human sacrifice is common. I mean, even the Greeks, the Mycenaean Greeks during before the Dark Age, you have these references there. Remember Agamemnon kills Iphigenia, right? The sacrifice to the dark goddess, and so this is just part of ancient stories. Doesn't mean they kept doing it. Eventually, rather than an actual human head, the ancient Celts substituted the head of basically with a turnip or a rutabaga to frighten off harmful spirits, carving them into lanterns. And this action was most likely reserved for special occasions, but of course, obviously, for Samhain. Now, of course, these heads were not only used for wisdom, right, but for protection. And then we get into the jack-o'-lantern. As for the name jack-o'-lantern, this designation goes back to the Irish. It looks like the Irish and the Scottish are competing here. Do you see that when it comes to some of these stories? Uh, this is the story of Stingy Jack. You guys have heard of Stingy Jack? He liked to gamble. He liked to drink. He enjoyed playing tricks on people. One day, he decided to play the ultimate trick on the devil himself. And so what he does is he chases the devil up a tree, and then below the tree, he puts the crucifix. And of course, the devil, he can't get down the tree because, the crucifix is there. So what happens is Stingy Jack makes a deal. He says, okay, I will remove the crucifix if you promise not to harass me and tempt me when I'm doing whatever I want to do. The devil agrees. He makes a bargain with the devil and says, okay, I'm not going to give you any penalties or anything else. I'll just leave you alone. Stingy Jack says, oh, that's great. So he gets away with everything. And so he dies. And he goes up to heaven. And he's not allowed in heaven because God is mad at him because he made a deal with the devil. He goes to hell. The devil's mad at him because, hey, you know what? I'm mad at you. I don't want you even in hell. So what happens is Stingy Jack gets stuck because he lived a disreputable life. He gets stuck in the realm in between. He's between heaven and hell in this in-between place, in this limbo, in this purgatorial state of endless night, right? And so with nothing but a candle inside of a hollow turnip to illuminate the way, so says the story. And so there you have it. It's a jack-o'-lantern. So to perhaps to connect this imagery to the wandering jack, turnip, known as the mango wurzels, were hollowed out and made into lanterns on, yes, Samhain. They're also known as punkies. I think we should call them punkies. Wouldn't that be fun? And they were lit up during the special ceremony, which included dancing, singing, and the lighting of bonfires. Of course, this goes back. But when the custom of carving jack-o'-lanterns reached North America, they thought, you know what? Maybe not a turnip. Let's go for a pumpkin. So that became the preferred vegetable. So there you have that particular story. Also, during this period of time, during the 19th century, now 18th, 19th century, I mentioned, of course, the bobbing for apples were becoming popularized amongst, it starts the Enlightenment, but it looks a Victorian subsect. We talked about that wonderful, placing nutshells into the fire. Uh, Another tradition happened during this period of time. People wrote messages on pieces of paper in milk, and then the notes were then folded and placed into walnut shells. And then they threw the walnut shells into the fire, causing the milk to brown just enough on the walnut shell to read the mysterious message that you had planned. And then, of course, it would go away. Another one, because you're going to ask me this question too, and that is mirror gazing. Because remember, this is the realm of the world are thin. It's like looking into a mirror. Mirror gazing for divination becomes popular. And of course, this goes back quite a ways. But the idea is the hope to catch a glimpse of themselves. You're having some one interesting story next to this one is that young women, and they used to, I'm sorry, this is too much fun. Well, young women used to walk backwards up the staircase, and they would be holding a candle and a hand mirror at the same time. I'm thinking, this is a recipe for disaster. So you can picture this Victorian lady wearing this long gown, walking upstairs backwards with her hands full. A mirror? No, I had a lantern. Okay. And the idea is that he walks backwards, and what will happen is that they will see whether or not they're the face of their future husband. So supposedly in the mirror, they're going to see the face of the future husband. But if they see a skeleton looking back in the mirror, that means that they're not going to get married. They're going to die. Well, I don't know, if you're walking upstairs backwards, holding a lamp in a mirror, I think you're asking for it. But I'm just saying. So this will start to combine with other stories of divination with the mirror, and it will connect to gradually evolve into what's called the Bloody Mary. You guys have heard this, right? The appearance of the corpse witch. Sometimes it's friendly, sometimes it's evil and covered in blood. It may curse you. It may steal your soul. It may scratch your eyes out, right? And so, where does this legend begin? A lot of scholars are fighting about this. Folklorists are fighting about this. Do they agree? No. Quite a few will say it connects to Mary the First of England, who burned 300 Protestants at the stake, and she's known as Bloody Mary. And the idea is Protestants didn't like her. She was not popular. Obviously, you have Elizabeth taking over after that. And so the idea, the concept is that we're going to, through folklore, is that, we got to worry that she may appear in the mirror if we're not careful, but we can make her appear. And so this idea, of course, Bloody Mary starts to form. Folklorists have been studying this since the 1970s, wondering where in the world this legend comes from. A lot will say it's from Protestant myth. Others will say, no, it's not. Others will say it's a combination of Victorian mirror stories. I just gave you that. I do want to say something interesting, is that people all over the world have these stories. I always think of the Hanukkah-san. You guys ever heard the Hanukkah-san stories? This is the Japanese legends. This goes all the way back to like the 1400s. In fact, one folklorist traces it back to 1470. And there's a similarity here. This Japanese legend is a young girl. Supposedly, it's a young girl who haunts the school toilets. Now, supposedly, she's from World War II era. Now, I got to tell you, it goes back to the 1400s, which means there's earlier incarnations of the spirit. But the most recent 20th century version is a World War II girl that had bobbed hair, wearing a red dress, and she's playing hide and go seek during the time when the bombs hit. And then, of course, she dies during this. But the earlier stories have it where she is, no, she wasn't that. She was murdered by her parents. And the earlier version of that story says, no, 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 she committed suicide. So, and again, folklore traces back to the 1400s. Well, the more modern story goes as follows: is that basically you go to the third story of your school, which of course, if your school has a third story, you go to the bathroom on the third story. You go to the third stall, and you knock 3 times, and you say, "Are you present?" And it says, "Yes, I am." Then, of course, a ghost will appear, and you take the risk. In some cases, the toilet becomes the opening to the underworld, or a three-headed lizard will come and attack you. I don't know if you really should do this. Don't try this at home. It's a bad idea. But uh, this is a period of time where the veil is thin, and so you're going to have these kinds of stories that just jump up. Okay, so yeah, and this only I won't go into unless you want to know more about it. These stories about this will go into stories like the Legend of Sleepy Hollow when it comes to heads, which is, of course, obviously Brothers Grimm and Ichabod Crane. I can talk about that. I can talk about the Dark Man. I can talk about the Wild Hunt legends that also now connect to this period of time, which and then of course I can go into other bits and pieces. But I want to make sure that I talk about one more holiday that connects to it, and that is the Day of the Dead. I want to make sure I do this, and then we can go back if we want to learn other things. But the Day of the Dead, Los Dias de los Muertos, right, it was originally a pre-Columbian celebration. It was practiced by many indigenous peoples in Mesoamerica, South America, including the Mexica, right? The Aztecs, right? The Day of the Dead was not originally celebrated on October 31st or November 1st or November 2nd. No, no. The Day of the Dead, this is, you may know this, may not this, it originally spanned the entire, from the end of July to mid-August, which is the 9th month of the Aztec calendar, and was celebrated all month long. So the Day of the Dead wasn't the Day of the Dead. It was the month of the dead. Although, having said that, the the Aztec calendar only has 20 days. Well, actually, the Mayan calendar also has only 20 days, and the Toltec, so it's all 20 days. So shorter months. So it's the month of the dead. The festival was dedicated to the goddess Tikasiwaro, often known as the Lady of the Dead. According to one version of the story, Tikasiwaro was once a human child that was sacrificed as an infant. Of course, infant sacrifice was common amongst the Aztecs and others. In fact, most of the central holy days of Tlaloc, who was the fierce god of rain, involved the sacrifice of children of some kind. So this just simply happens, right? On his holiday, or a special time, which is on February 12th, children were sacrificed at the top of mountains throughout the Aztec realms. In fact, the horrible thing is that the child, they'd be told they're being sacrificed, and the more they cry, the more that was considered good luck, because that would be sympathetic magic to make it rain more. I know. Anyway, so moving right along, and then of course when they sacrificed them on the top of the hilltops, the removal of the heart and so forth. Okay, moving right along. So Tikasiwaro was depicted as a skeleton with her jaw open wide so she could swallow the stars during the daylight hours. Tikasiwaro was traditionally the goddess that watched over bones. And so it was more than simply looking over the bones to make sure there's no desecration. See, accordingly, the belief is that all people are made of the bones of those of the past. So the bones of those of the past would be recycled to be used in the various different worlds: the first world, second world, third world, fourth world. And so the bones needed to be guarded so they could be part of the next creation. Now, so what happens is Micotikacihuatl, her sacred animal attendant was, well, bird attendant was the owl, and was known to live in this really dark region. The Mexica, the Aztecs gave various lots of blood to her, blood offerings. In some cases, what they will do is they will take, they'll have this rope. And this is earlier on too. Other groups did this too, and they had horns, not horns, thorns, yeah, maybe horns, thorns on this rope. And what they would do is they'd stick this rope with the thorns, they stick it through their lower lip, and they go like this, they go like that. And they do that, it would go into a blood bowl. And then they would offer this blood bowl, this life force, to this goddess. I don't want to do that, but I'm just saying. Her consort was Mictlantecuhtli, and this is the Lord of Death, who was also honored with these offerings. In fact, the idea, anyway, so the ideal here is that Mictlantecuhtli continued to be part of the popular imagination. And then there came along, I want to tell you the story because I think it's interesting. I really find it fascinating. There is this Mexican artist. His name is Jose Guadalupe Posada. He lived from 1852 to 1913. He was hired as a political cartoonist. And he made cartoons in this work called The Bumblebee. He loved drawing these scary drawings. He did ruin the paper. People were too scared of his cartoons, and after 13 issues, the paper closed down. But what he did is he made these scary images of death and other kinds of themes, combining Catholic and earlier Aztec as well as Toltec and Mayan influences. So what he did, he became most famous for drawing skeletons. He liked drawing skeletons, but eventually, of course, so even though the newspaper folded, people bought his skeleton art and they seemed to like it, but then they got tired of it. And then, unfortunately, he died in poverty in 1913. It's too bad. But before he died, right before he died, sometime between 1910 and 1913, Posada made a famous image of a skeleton woman wearing an elaborate European hat, complete with flowers and plumes. I'm sure you've seen this before. This kind of hat was all the rage before World War I. Well, he was using this as a commentary on how those in Mexico were following too much of the European fashions. But what happened is that many will then connect this image to Mictlantecuhtli herself, and so she becomes in popular culture represented by Postada's image of a skeleton. She becomes, and then she then in turn connects to a saint called Saint Muerta. So now this combines with Saint Muerta. That's so interesting. Sorry. So you have this one image, right? Postada's image, right? This Postada's image is now kind of coming together with this other idea. Who is Santa Muerta? Well, the story goes back to the end of the Spanish Inquisition in Mexico, the 18th century. There's one story that the inquisitors, for some reason, they tied up the skeleton and whipped the skeleton in order to get their wishes granted. It's a kind of a strange kind of custom, almost seems semi-magical and weird. You get your wishes by beating the skeleton, or threatening it with the whip, right? She didn't comply, but so that she was completely beaten until she consented. So what happened is that she became known as Saint Death. Okay, so now what happens is her memory kind of went underground for a period of time, and reappeared during World War II, during the 1940s, in Mexico City. And when Mia Tiatina venerated her in the 1950s. And so what happens now is this Saint Muerta, this will become, as opposed to this skeleton that is tied down and beaten by the inquisitors, and finally will give whatever wish you want, which is just horrible. Instead, this idea is reforged, and she becomes the protector of souls, both children and adults. And then this concept will combine with Mika Tika Siwato. And so, in fact, she's even depicted with the owl. See how these ideas just all kind of come together? And so today, Lady Death is petitioned for everything, business, justice, protection from danger, attracting lovers. Votive candles are offered to you. If you go to Day of the Dead celebrations, you're going to see, Santa Muerto being shown there. But I want you to understand that she does combine with Mika Tika Siwato in aspect two. So she is a saint for some, a goddess for others, and she's reforged from being a tormented skeleton to something that is a protectress, which is a beautiful thing. I like that. It's good. Well, the Catholic Church doesn't like it too well. So it's the fact they proclaim that she's not a saint. She's a degeneration of religion, and saying that she's of the devil. Well, because that's anyway. That's the official. When the Spanish conquered Mexico, they attempted to end the month-long festival of Mi Tika Siwato. But this tradition was simply ingrained in the traditions of the people. And so guess what happens? You have this month-long or 20-day-long celebration gets moved. I know, a surprise. And guess where it goes? It goes to November 1st and November 2nd, and coincides with All Saints Day and All Souls Day, November 1st and 2nd. Just like the Roman holidays got moved, right? So now the indigenous holiday of the Mexica and those of Mexico get moved to All Saints Day, and they all combine together. Okay, so there you have it. But you can see how remember the Roman idea of having dinners beside the graveside, which they celebrated, which was still popular throughout Latin America. Throughout European Latin areas of Europe. Excuse me. So in other words, this idea of eating by the graveside of the beloved for their special days, which had moved to the time of All Saints Day, All Souls Day, throughout places like Italy and Spain and Portugal and south of France. Well, this combines with the same kind of idea that's occurring amongst the Mexica. Isn't this fascinating? Okay, so while November 1st is All Saints Day for Catholics, it is also the Day of the Innocents, right? Also known as the Day of the Little Angels for the indigenous peoples. While November 2nd is known as All Souls Day for the Catholics, it is a Dia de los Muertos, right? The Day of the Dead for the indigenous peoples. See how that works? And so the assimilation now moves together, right? And, there was a way, though, that convinced the indigenous peoples to think that maybe this will work, moving it from July to August into November. And that is, there are those who are basically have the migrating monarch butterflies. They return to Mexico during this period of time, and the butterflies in the imagination of those of Mesoamerica are connected with souls. Got it? So the idea of the returning monarchs, butterflies, could be understood as a return of the souls in a symbolic sense. They're going, all right, we'll go with it. Okay. Well, of course, meanwhile, Spanish associated with the Aztec deity, the black Tezcatlipoca, with the devil. while Mika Tika Siwada was death or Lady of the Dead. So for the Mexica, the devil and death were often interpreted as brother and sister. For the Mexica, this continued. These traditions continued into the 19th and 20th centuries, where it was believed it was actually used to scare people to go into church, because the idea is you better be in church on these days because there's Lady Death looking through the stained glass windows at you, so you better stay in church. Okay, okay. Now, in preparation for these days, beautiful altars are made at home, lavishly decorated with flowers, especially marigolds and bright red combs, right? Offerings include tons of food, right? Stacks of tortillas. I'm getting hungry. Fruits of all kinds, peanuts, and other kinds of plates. Day of the Dead breads, of course. Drinks are also generously placed on the altars, including hot cocoa and soda and water. The arriving spirits, they need to be fed, just like the arriving spirits on the days of the dead of the Romans had to be fed. Remember that? Well, guess what? Same tradition is here amongst the Mexica. And obviously, you're supposed to give, to the relative or ancestor, but relative, foods that they liked, just like the Romans, for their deceased, had to give them the foods that they liked. And so there you have it. So on the Day of the Innocents, some visit the graves of infants and bring toys along with other decorations. But in some cases, the family kind of waits to visit them the next day. However, the night before, sometimes children make an altar dedicated to the spirit of the children. So that's interesting. On the Day of the Dead, families typically visit the graves of their loved ones, and they go out and clean the graves, cutting the grass if need be. Have I been to one of these celebrations? Of course I have. So I was married for many years, the Hispanic background. So yeah, we did this. Next, the grave is decorated with flowers, and candles, and foods, and drinks. Photos are placed here too with the deceased, right? There's an all-night vigil that follows. You tell family stories about the deceased one. You try to be cheerful, even tell fun stories. It's a time, I love this. It's a time for remembering those you love. You know, I'm choking up here. Sorry. Cherish those that you love. That's on a special day, and I think that's a great idea. Okay, so we're almost done. Meanwhile, of course, one more last thing. Of course, you have the tradition of making sugar skulls, right? The sugar industry was really big in Europe. It arrived amongst the Italians in the 1600s. And by the way, this art of making sugar skulls started in Palermo, Italy. And so it was used for making angels and lambs to decorate churches. It's a nice, cheap way of making these things, but you can guess sooner or later, they're thinking, you know what, actually, really soon, sugar skulls appear, and these become very popular. And of course, each skull was understood as representing a soul, and they would write the name of the deceased directly in the forehead. And so these sugar skulls were either placed on the altar intended for the Day of the Dead or placed on the gravestone. Either way, this activity was intended to honor the soul of the deceased. And the sugar skulls, they're all smiling. And so it's this idea of happiness, of celebration. And so there you have it. I didn't give you all the answers, but I gave you a lot of different possibilities, myriads of ideas. But just understand that Halloween is really a mixture of all these different belief systems converging together as one. As a real quick final recap, you've got obviously the Samhain tradition, the Celtic tradition. You have it over here. You have over here, you have the Roman tradition, the Roman, Pomona and the Lemuria and all that, which is all kind of spread out over the calendar. And then what happens is Christianity arises, And what it does is it slowly converts Samhain into a day dedicated to the saints. Meanwhile, they're doing their work on the other side, uh, making Lemuria its own separate day of the saints and Mary. And then what they do is they take these and they combine together as one. Okay, there you got that mush. And then what happens is that now you have this combination of these ideas coming together. You got a little bit of Celtic beliefs, lots of Celtic beliefs and ideas. You got Roman beliefs and ideas, and when they converge, they really amplify those ideas. Like, for example, the apple concept, right? And then with a Christian overglaze, and then Christianization continues, comes over the New World, and these earlier ideas seem to pop out during the Victorian era and into the early 20th century. These earlier traditions and ideas that are encountering a new modern world. And then at the same time, you have this other stratum, which of course is the Mexica, the ideas of the Mesoamerica of the Mayans into the Toltecs and Aztecs, and their month of the dead, which becomes the Day of the Dead, and that becomes transferred over as well. So you're looking at what is Halloween? Is it Celtic? Yes. Is it Roman? Yes. Is it Christian? Yes. Is it Mesoamerican? Yes. And all these competing claims really do blend together into this cornucopia and this wonderful holiday that we'll be celebrating later on this month. And I hope you enjoyed this talk. I gave you a lot of material. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And I drank all my water.
Why October 31st? Why is every other date there's no the day of the Souls Day and everything? November 1st, November 2nd. Why was it transitioned to October 31st for our? Was it convenience or just who knows why?
It's a misunderstanding. The misunderstanding is that the day begins, November 1st begins on the evening at sundown. So it's a different understanding of days. So for us, we see the new day starting at midnight. But for the ancients, especially the Celts, their day, the new day starts at sundown. Also, you see this in Jewish thought too. Sundown, like Passover, right? So,
I see. Interesting.
Is this fascinating? Yeah. So
it is. It is.
So really, we should be celebrating, not November 1st, but if we want to be traditional, you can kind of maybe hold the kids back until the sun sets, and then theoretically, it really is Halloween, because Halloween, of course, means Halloween evening. Yeah. So
let's just hold them back anyway. Talk to November 1st.
Hold them back all together, right? Right.
Yeah, exactly. Just hold them back.
Yeah. Great question, by the way. Thank you so much. Margie says, I just thought about handing out candy instead of cakes and fruit. The availability of processed sugar would have had a big influence on the choice of treat. Yeah, I hate to say that, much like Valentine's Day and other holidays, it looks like there's some commercial marketing being involved as we get into the 20s and 30s with candy. It's like, hey, not a cake, not fruit. A candy, because I remember my grandpa, they those days, my grandpa, it's apples, it's fruit still. Fruits are still the kind of, that's what you give. So if you ask your great grandparents or grandparents, it still is fruits and nuts, never a banana. Squish. I think it's an idea. And it's like, ooh, candy. So it becomes an opportunity for a commercialization to really step in, which is too bad. It'll rot your teeth. Yes, any other questions?
Plus, it was Moaning Myrtle, the ghost in the bathroom in Harry Potter.
Yes.
Wasn't everybody thinking Moaning Myrtle?
I was thinking Moaning Myrtle. Yeah, Moaning Myrtle. Yeah, I mean, you got to think, it's so interesting because you have so many stories and legends about seeing things in the mirror,
Mhm.
and using that for divination. I mean, it goes back even, I mean, there's even Greek mythological ideas connected to looking at the reflection in the water in the mirror. So, I mean, in divining by the mirror, I mean, you have even the oracle of Nineveh. The oracle was seen through the waters. But, so yeah, so you can see where these ideas kind of combine together, even with the Bloody Mary story. And these are stories that are part of popular culture, and we don't have anthropologists writing all these down at the time. And so the thing is, when these stories start to appear, we think to ourselves, is this where they're starting? Or has it been going on for a long time beforehand and they're just now writing it down?
Yeah.
And I do believe that there is a connection between souling and then, of course, into the trick or treat idea. You can see that. And the connecting chord is, of course, the Scottish, right? I see this kind of tug of war between the Irish and Scottish. Like, yeah, and the English are all, hey, we're here somewhere. It's like, yeah, but it seems like a lot of the stories are coming from that area when it comes to Samhain and some of these other innovations.
I had no idea. It was
Yeah.
all new knowledge.
So, any other questions?
What countries celebrate Halloween the way we do, besides the UK, I suppose, and
Oh, well,
Canada?
Mm.
it's celebrated all over the place now. Western culture is very well entrenched. So it's celebrated throughout Europe, and of course the Americas, in degrees, intensities, So there are certain countries where it's not as much. It just depends on wherever the touch of European as well as American influence happened to be. So that's a good question. Yeah.
Yeah, I was in Italy for Halloween a couple of years back, and they did have a small amount of Halloweenish stuff in the shops, but it was kind of a new and interesting thing that they were just trying out.
Yeah. So I mean, it's fun. It takes a while, but it'll be there. Oh, thank you, Julian. You said wonderful. You turned this. Oh, thank you so much. This was wonderful, and turned an ordinary night into something so cool and spooky. I'm working early tomorrow, so unfortunately I have to log out. Thank you so much for being here, Julian. Much appreciated. Yeah, wonderful. Great having you here. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Oh, I guess we have a statement, not a question. Perry says, you can join me for my talk on the ancient Manichaeans on November 17th. So that will be really interesting. So from my perspective.
All right. Looking forward to that one.
All right. And of course, there's a talk before, but I lost it I don't even know what I'm talking before this. What am I talking about before this? Laurel says I was very thorough. Okay, so I knew at a certain point when I got to 9:30, I'm not, you'll have so many more questions. I thought, okay, I better keep going and anticipate all the questions. That's what I did. So thank you, Laurel. Okay, so I'm doing my Magic in the Early Medieval Church
Yes.
on November 3rd. And then on November 17th, I'm doing a talk on Manichaeism. So there you have it.
Message from Starfleet Command, top priority.
What was that?
That's my text alert. Sorry.
Oh, wow. I was ready to go to service. Let's
Yeah.
let's go.
Yeah, this is Lieutenant Uhura. She
All
tells me when
right.
I have a text.
Yeah. Well, if there's no more questions, you're all happy and you're all satisfied. I'm so happy I got to talk about the stories of Mexico. I was so happy to bring that in there. I was going, oh no, this is so interesting. I want to make sure I do that. Okay. Well, then have a great night. And I will see you in a few weeks from now.